Hi, I'm the History Guy. I have a degree in history and I love history. And if you love history too, this is the channel for you. 43 years ago this week, on July 17th, 1975, 5 people had a meeting where they shook hands. Although they were from different countries, they had a shared avocation and they were engaged in a shared business project. They had met before. This wasn't their first meeting. They'd met hundreds of times. This was really just the culmination of the larger project. And by itself, that's not all that special. People meet all the time. People shake hands all the time. Frequently, it's just a friendly bit of mundane life. But sometimes it's something more. This meeting was special in a unique, new, and powerful way. It represented a tectonic shift in understanding and thinking for billions of people. It was a handshake 138 miles above the earth. And that is a handshake that deserves to be remembered. Bernard Baruch was a successful financier before he became an influential statesman. As chairman of the War Industry Board, he managed America's economic mobilization during the First World War. As an advisor to President Roosevelt during World War II, his ideas regarding mobilization were estimated to have reduced by more than 2 years the time it took for the U.S. to start mass-producing weapons of war, a fact that was instrumental in winning the war. After the war, President Truman made him the United States representative to the United Nations Atomic Energy Commission, where he presented a plan for international control of atomic energy. That plan became a flashpoint in a new rivalry between East and West. In a speech in 1947, Mr. Baruch gave a name to that rivalry. "Let us not be deceived," he said. "We are today in the midst of a Cold War." The Cold War had its roots in the political alignment of Europe after the Second World War. The Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, moved quickly to dominate nations surrounding them. In 1946, former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill coined the term Iron Curtain to describe the Soviet domination of Eastern Europe. In response, Joseph Stalin likened Churchill to Adolf Hitler. A seminal moment in the Cold War, some say its official start, was the enunciation of the Truman Doctrine, which adopted an American policy of containment of Soviet expansion. This was bolstered by the Marshall Plan, the Plan for European Recovery, named after U.S. Secretary of State George C. Marshall, which was designed to rebuild European economies after the war, but also provided billions of dollars in military aid, presumably for the purpose of resisting Soviet advances. While U.S. and Soviet military forces never clashed directly, the Cold War was expressed through military coalitions, strategic conventional force deployments, extensive aid to states deemed vulnerable, proxy wars, espionage, propaganda, and most terrifyingly, a nuclear arms race. As the world polarized, both sides tested nuclear weapons and the terrifying policy of mutually assured destruction, positing mutual deterrence that results from the threat of both sides being annihilated, became the new norm. Children were taught how to hide under their desks, living in constant fear of nuclear annihilation. That possibility came dangerously close in October of 1962, when a series of escalations over U.S. deployment of ballistic missiles in Italy and Turkey and Soviet deployment of ballistic missiles in Cuba drew the two sides to the very brink of nuclear war. And nothing represented the rivalry of the Cold War more than the so-called space race. The race was announced in 1955, when in separate announcements, just 4 days apart, both nations publicly announced that they would launch artificial Earth satellites by 1957 or 1958. This competition in space technology might have appeared as a benign pursuit of science, but it was anything but. Not only was economic and technical competition an integral part of the Cold War and a proxy argument regarding the strengths of rival economic and political systems, it was also part and parcel of the competition to build more effective delivery systems for nuclear weapons. And it was there, in the race for technology that represented the most heated competition of the Cold War, that the most public opportunity for rapprochement was found. The pinnacle of this competition was the U.S. Apollo program, which successfully landed humanity on the moon with Apollo 11 on July 20th, 1969. And the Soviet Soyuz spacecraft, which, although it never made it to the moon, launched its first successful manned mission in 1968, and today is considered the safest and most cost-effective human space vehicle in history, and is still used for transport to and from the International Space Station. Soviet and American scientists had considered the technical aspects for docking the two systems in 1971, under the reasoning that that would allow either to facilitate a rescue mission if another ship got into trouble. But the U.S. war in Vietnam, the largest of America's Cold War proxy wars, prevented any joint Soviet-American cooperation in space. As the Vietnam War wound down, the opportunity brightened. There were technical challenges. The Americans and Soviets used different oxygen mixes in their craft, but those seemed trivial next to the political challenges. On July 17, 1975, the world watched as astronaut Tom Stafford and cosmonaut Alexei Leonov shook hands. It was a seminal event. As the Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev commented, "From outer space, our planet looks even more beautiful. It is big enough for us to live peacefully on it, but it is too small to be threatened by nuclear war." The Apollo-Soyuz test program didn't end the Cold War or even the space race. In fact, tensions would rise again before the end of the 1970s, and the Cold War didn't really end until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. There were nearly 2 decades between Apollo-Soyuz and the next joint Russian-American space program, the Shuttle-Mir program. But Apollo-Soyuz really did change things. As astronaut Vance Brand said, "We were a little of a spark, a foot in the door that started better communications." And cosmonaut Alexei Leonov said, "We were supposed to show the world that we are human beings, that we work together in the most sophisticated area of human activity." And that door is now wide open. While the United States and Russia still have our tensions, while this video is being produced, 2 Americans, Jack Fisher and Peggy Whitson, and 1 Russian, Mission Commander Fyodor Yurchikhin, are crewing the International Space Station. Apollo-Soyuz represents 2 important facts of the space race. It was the last use of an Apollo command module. The technology that was the pinnacle of the competition in space ended its career in a mission of cooperation. And in an unprecedented display of openness, Apollo-Soyuz represents the first time that a Soviet space mission was announced ahead of time and aired live. Always previously, all Soviet space missions were only announced after they had been completed. The 2 mission commanders, Stafford and Leonov, became so close during the training that they now refer to each other as brothers. Leonov's granddaughter is named after Stafford's daughter. Zeke Slayton, the oldest of the 5 crew members of the Apollo-Soyuz mission and one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts, died of cancer in 1993 at the age of 69. And cosmonaut Valery Kubasyev passed away of natural causes in 2014 at the age of 79. But 3 of the 5 crew members, Tom Stafford, Vance Brand, and Alexei Leonov, are still around today to remember that extraordinary handshake. I'm the History Guy, and I hope you enjoyed this edition of my series, 5 Minutes of History, short snippets of forgotten history, 5 to 10 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please click that thumbs up button, which is there on your left. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for other topics for the History Guy, feel free to write those in the comment section, and I will be happy to respond. And if you'd like 5 minutes more forgotten history, all you need to do is click subscribe.